At the end of the 17th century, France and Britain weren't really getting along that well for a number of reasons. French brandy was quite popular at the time with the British masses, and so the government passed a variety of laws restricting the imports of brandy and encouraging another alcoholic beverage to take its place, gin. This was done through policies like reducing taxes associated with gin production and sales, and it worked. People stopped buying brandy and started buying gin. People stopped buying beer and started buying gin. People stopped buying a lot of things and started buying gin. Too many people were buying too much gin, and it got very much out of hand. From 1721 to 1751, 5 major acts of parliament were brought into legislation in order to try to stop the flow of gin around the country, in a legislative effort that has been compared to a modern-day drug war. It was only the act in 1751 which seemed to be more successful than the failures before, which had simply relied on raising taxes around the production and sale of gin. The Gin Act of 1751 then made it so that gin could only be sold by the manufacturers to premises that held an appropriate licence. This wasn't the first time that a licence had been put on something alcohol related, but it was an important step. Fast forward 3/4 of a century and a batch of licensing acts were on their way, imaginatively referred to as the Licensing Acts 1828 to 1886. These acts all served various purposes. For example, the Beer House Act in 1830 sought to increase competition amongst brewers, and successfully did so, which in turn massively increased the amount of brewers in the country and also decreased the price of beer. But it was the Licensing Act of 1872 that I want to look at in this video. I wasn't really able to find any sources that described why the Licensing Act of 1872 was brought about in the first place, but given its effects, I assume that at the time there were issues with drunkenness around the country, and perhaps pressure was being put on the government to deal with the increase in disorderly behaviour caused by alcohol, and maybe this was a result of previous acts, such as the Beer House Act in 1830. But that's just my own speculation. There were a few important and impactful sections of the 1872 Licensing Act. It restricted public house opening hours in the country, it regulated the production of beer, seemingly to stop manufacturers put salt in it to make people more thirsty, and gave power to local authorities to dictate licensing hours. Nearly all sections of this law, however, including the parts that I just mentioned, are no longer in force, either through direct repeal or just through more updated laws coming into force. In fact, the only section of the law that remains, apart from Section 1, which is just the title, and Section 2, which says this act shall not extend to Scotland, is Section 12. Section 12 is titled Penalty on Persons Found Drunk, and details the criteria of which people can be prosecuted for being drunk. For example, every person found drunk in any highway or other public place, whether a building or not, or on any licensed premises, shall be liable to a penalty. The word licensed premises here is referring to premises that are licensed to sell alcohol, namely a pub. This part of the law is still in force, so it's currently illegal to be drunk in a pub in the United Kingdom, a place that I'm sure many people have gone to get drunk. Interestingly, the Act includes all licensed premises, so that's any private place where there is a license to sell alcohol, including nightclubs. I say private because the law also forbids drunkenness in any public place, whether a building or not. It also applies a fine to anyone who is drunk while in charge on any highway or other public place of any carriage, horse, cattle or steam engine, or who is drunk when in possession of any loaded firearms. Interestingly, this wasn't the first time this kind of thing was put into law. For example, the 1606 Drunkenness Act simply forbade one to be drunk. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this video and feel free to subscribe if you haven't already to hear more from us. Next week I plan to do another Harry Potter video, so look forward to that if you like that kind of thing, and if not then just wait until the week after, I guess. Have a wonderful week and stay safe.